Hi, this is Julie from Silver Birch Studio, and today I'm going to show you how to make things leaf out on your iPad with Procreate. First off, I'm using a document that is 4,000 pixels by 3,200 pixels. I am using a watercolor texture on this, but if you don't have one, that's fine. You can just use a regular document with that screen size. Okay, I've got my bottom layer here named Stem. I'm going to start out there. And the brush I'm using is from my Watercolor Magic brush kit. It's the Duo Color Bleeding Outline Blooms brush. But if you don't have that, you could substitute, it's a native Procreate brush. It's under the Artistic tab, and it's the Wild Light brush. That's probably the closest of the native Procreate brushes. So we're going to start out with this one, the Duo Color Bleeding Outline Blooms. It is a duo color brush, as the name would indicate, and we're going to, in our color palette, which is free by the way, it's linked down below, so you'll find that link down there to get that. We're going to work with this first pair of colors in the palette. And the way this brush works is by you pick one color and then the other color. You're going to want the darker of the two to be the one selected in this circle up here. So once you've got that set, I'm going to use the size at about 10% for the stem. That should be nice and small enough. And I'm going to kind of make a nice swoop. I think that adds some interest to the piece if it's got some curve to it. Now we're gonna move to the leaves layer, which is the next one up. I'm doing the leaves on a separate layer so that if I need to move them around or tweak them, I can do that independently from the stem. I find that helps. So we're going to use the same brush, but we're going to raise the size to about 45–50%, somewhere in there. So this brush is pressure sensitive. We're going to use the pressure sensitivity of the brush to help make the leaf. So when you start out light, heavy, and then light again. That really helps create the leaf shape. So again, light pressure, heavy pressure, light pressure. Light, more, less. Light, more, less. So I like to vary the directions of the leaves because I think it gives the piece more life and more interest. Keep the pressure working for you to make the leaf shapes. All right, I think that gives us a good leaf shape to work with. The only thing, I'm not loving the end of this one. I kind of like the rest of them. I think they look good. So I'm actually going to use my secret weapon on this. So go to the Magic Wand tool, go to liquify, and in this case I'm going to use push. And you'll want to keep your distortion down low, your pressure and momentum on max. And I think size-wise, let's start out at about 14% here. No, we're gonna need more than that. Let's start out at about 24. Now, I've pushed that in. That looks better. That looks more natural in terms of the placement of it, but obviously that messed up the end. But don't worry, we can fix that. So we go to Edge. The Edge tool should be our friend here. And what the Edge tool does is it kind of pulls things together and it'll bring things to a nice point for us. So there, I think that looks much better. I think we'll go with that. You zoom out here, get back to our brush. All right. So I'm happy with that. I'm actually going to merge the leaves and stem together. And then I may do some smudging on this one. So I'm going to go to the smudge tool, and I'm going to use the Silver Birch Studio Fluffy Blender Small on this one. Opacity is somewhere around 60%. Size-wise, I'm going to keep it pretty small, around 6. Zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. And just get the colors blending together better where the leaves and stem meet together. I find this really helps to kind of correct any areas that you don't like, or mix together different layers like this. You can get a really nice blend with this brush, with this blender brush. And just so that you know, you probably know this, but the way blender brushes work is by pulling color from where you start to where you finish. So if I pull the lighter green back in, it'll pull it into the darker green, and then if I pull the darker green out, it'll pull it into the lighter green. So by going back and forth, you'll get a nice blend on this. And I'll go ahead and speed this up now so that you don't have to watch this in slow-mo, because it's not the most exciting process ever. So I'll see you back in a few minutes once I've got this all blended up. We're back all blended up. Just so that you know, if you don't have the Watercolor Magic brushes, you can use one of the soft air brushes to do the blending. That's probably the closest thing that would be native to Procreate. All right, now I think the next step is to get this bad boy centered up here. So I'm on Uniform, Move Tool, Uniform, Snapping. My snapping, I've got snapping set but not magnetics. And that will help us center this up. And when you get those crosshairs, you know it's perfectly centered. So we'll click off that. Now we're perfectly centered. Now I want to add a background to this, but because the watercolor pigment is somewhat see-through, I want to make sure that none of the background is feeding through the leaves. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate the stem and leaves here, and then I'm going to go up to my Magic Wand tool. I'm going to go to Hue, Saturation, and Brightness, and Layer. Once that comes up, I'm going to slide my brightness all the way to the max. Go back to my layer here, duplicate it a couple of times, pinch those together, duplicate again, pinch together, and you can see we're starting to see it's disappearing. I think we need to do this one more time to get it to disappear completely. Pinch that together, and that looks pretty good to me. I really don't see much of a sign of it left. So now we move it below the leaves and stem, and we'll pinch that together so that they don't get separated. Now to do some background. Let's move a layer beneath the stem so that it's a background. And we'll change the name here to keep organized. And then I'm going to go back to my color palette, and I'm going to pick this pale cream color here. And then I'm going to drag it and drop it in place. I like that better than the pure white. I think it kind of blends nicely with the green tones there, so I'm happy with that. Now I want to add some more interest, so I'm going to move this down, this layer down. So again, beneath the stem, but above that cream background that we made. I'm going to rename it, and we'll call it Texture. All right, so now go back to your brushes here, and we're going to use the SBS Background and Blooms 1. This is probably my favorite of the Background and Blooms, but they're all kind of fun. Go back to the color palette. I'm going to pick the darker cream color and then the taupey color. So the taupey is the selected one up in the circle here. Have my size at maximum. And what this brush does is it just lays down some pigment in a very kind of watercolory way, if that's a word. If you get that really dark bit there, you just go back over it. And it just adds a little interest and texture. So I'm pretty happy with that. I might want to reduce the opacity just a hair. So I'm going to go back to the layers panel, click on that N there, and drop down the opacity just a little bit. Somewhere around 60 I think looks good. I think we'll go with that. I'm happy with that. All right, so now to add another layer of interest to the piece, we're going to copy our stem and leaves. We're going to move it below the original one. We're going to click on the Move tool. We're going to flip horizontally. We're going to rotate it a bit, move it over. That looks pretty good. I might increase the size just a little bit. And I know at this point you're thinking, what is she doing? That looks insane. But there is method to my madness. So once you've got it in a position that you're pretty happy with, go back to the layer. We're going to change the blend mode. There's a number of these that will work, but I think we're going to go with divide. And that creates this nice light kind of ghostly version back there behind our original leaves. And I'm going to lower the opacity probably to about half. I think that looks good. You can use your own judgment. Let's rename this Ghost 1, since they're kind of ghostly leaves behind the original. Now we're going to do the same process again. I'm going to duplicate, move that down. We'll rename this one and call it Ghost 2. And again, we'll take it, I think we'll flip it vertically this time. Move it over. I'm gonna make this a little smaller so we can see better. I'm gonna rotate it a little bit. And now I think I want to distort it a bit more. So I'm going to switch to the warp panel in the Move tool. And I'm just going to tweak some of the leaves so they look a little bit different. And you just do that by dragging on the mesh here. And you can get some really nice effects that way. You don't want to bend it out of all recognition, but I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go with that. Click on the Move tool to deselect it. And now again, I'm going to change my blend mode back down to that divide. You can play around with other blend modes too. There's some of the others that will work as well. But I think divide's going to work for us this time. And I'm going to take it down maybe a little bit less this time. We'll go to about 60. And you can see that kind of gives you some added interest to the background. I think it adds something extra. And you can of course move these around and tweak them, make them larger or smaller. Normally I don't suggest making anything too much larger than the original because you'll lose some quality. But I think for these ghostly backgrounds that it actually works pretty well. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to take another layer. I'm going to drag it beneath our original stem and leaves here. And this one I'm going to take and add a little extra something to. And you'll find a link down below to get this brush. It's a border brush, Rectangle Border 1. I'm going to switch my color palette to my color palette here to select this green. I'm going to use this brush on the full size. I'm going to click in the middle, and it creates this border. It's a stamp brush. I think we could actually make this even a hair larger. So let's go back to uniform under the move tool. Make it just a little bit bigger. I'm good with that. And then we've got our snapping set, so we can just drag it until it's perfectly centered there. And there you have it. We're kind of all framed out. We've got an interesting background, and we're all leafed out for this spring. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Please do all the usual things, like, subscribe, all the rest of it. That way you'll be on board with new tutorials as I add them. And be sure to check out the links down below to get the free stuff, the free palette and the free stamp brush. And that link down below will take you to an area where there's some other free palettes, and I'll be adding more freebies to that area as time goes by. So a good thing to do. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.